You awaken beneath sheets so smooth they feel like liquid silk, softer than anything your skin has ever touched. Light pours in through windows framed by gold, scattering across walls encrusted with gemstones that glimmer like stolen fragments of the stars. The air is thick with the scent of jasmine, layered with rosewater, cloying and sweet. Servants in flowing robes of amber and scarlet wait silently, eyes lowered, their hands folded as if they existed for no other reason than to anticipate your every whim. For a moment, you believe you've ascended to a paradise. This is the reward, you tell yourself, the honor beyond honor. Out of thousands of hopeful girls, you have been singled out, chosen to step into the legendary Imperial Chambers, the most exclusive world within the Empire. Here, they tell you, you will live as if divine, attended, admired, even worshipped by the man who holds the power of life and death over millions. But as your bare feet touch the cold, polished stone floor, something unsettles you. The women around you glide like shadows, their beauty undeniable, yet their movements are sharpened by tension. They never meet your eyes for more than a heartbeat. Their gazes flick nervously toward corners where guards linger in silence. Some of the elder women move stiffly, their wrists and hands scarred with marks you cannot explain. The perfume in the air, so intoxicating at first, carries an undertone you cannot place. Metallic, rotten, wrong. Welcome to the true Imperial Harem. A place where beauty was never a blessing, it was a weapon. A world where sex was politics. Where survival meant mastering a labyrinth of rules so grotesque they sound like nightmares. Behind jeweled walls and velvet curtains lay one of history's most bizarre experiments in human control. Here, concubines became soldiers in an invisible war. Every glance, every whisper, every moment of intimacy was both a privilege and a threat. Emperors made choices that would shake dynasties not only with armies or treaties, but with the women they pulled into their beds. And you are about to see why. From rulers who let animals dictate their lovers, to women who traded their bodies like market goods, these chambers witnessed acts so deranged they make the chaos of modern romance seem almost innocent. You will hear of selection rituals that stripped human dignity to the bone, of records so precise that every encounter was archived like military orders, of rivalries so vicious that women slit throats or poisoned cups for nothing more than a single night of favor. Before we plunge into the darkest corners of these forbidden palaces, if you are fascinated by the hidden truths history tried to bury, remember to like this video and subscribe for more journeys behind the curtains of power. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? It still amazes me that across oceans and continents, we are piecing together these fragments of humanity's shadowed past together. Now, let us begin at the very gates of this nightmare, with the most dehumanizing ritual of all, the selection. Imagine this. You are a young woman living a quiet life in the provinces, surrounded by family, your future uncertain, but yours to dream of. Then, one morning, Imperial soldiers thunder down the path to your home. They are not here for taxes, nor to deliver decrees. They are here for you. Dragged before officials, you are stripped bare beneath the eyes of strangers. They measure every inch of your body with cold precision. They pry your mouth open to count and inspect your teeth, as if you were a horse at market. They test your joints, your posture, your skin. Every blemish is noted, every imperfection judged. But the ordeal does not end there. Those who survive the physical scrutiny are forced into rounds of behavioral and mental trials designed to break the spirit. You must walk in silence, balance gracefully, eat with perfect etiquette, while judges record your every gesture. You must stand without speaking for hours, still as a statue, while unseen eyes watch for signs of impatience. This was not an accident, it was strategy. The Empire did not want women with passion, creativity, or ambition. They wanted ornaments, obedient vessels, objects that could serve their function without rebellion or complaint. And for those who passed this gauntlet, the so-called honor that awaited was nothing short of annihilation. A life where individuality dissolved, where every breath and movement was calibrated to the desires of a single man who could, at any moment, replace you with another. Your body became state property, your intimacy a resource to be managed. Entire bureaucracies were built around the emperor's private life, as if his satisfaction were the very engine of the empire. Secretaries with vermilion brushes recorded each night's activities, transforming moments of flesh into lines of official text. Schedules were drawn with military precision. No woman could be with the ruler too often, lest jealousy upset the balance. No woman could be ignored too long, lest neglect be read as insult. Calendars filled not with harvests or holy days, but with sexual rotations, ensuring the sovereign's appetite was met with ruthless efficiency. To exist in this system was to surrender even your most private moments to the pen of an administrator. Intimacy became inventory, passion became protocol, and survival meant navigating a machine that saw you not as a person, but as an entry in a ledger. That was only the beginning. And yet, compared to what came later, compared to what unfolded in other empires, this was almost tame. Because while the Chinese courts perfected bureaucracy, the Ottomans refined hierarchy into something even more sinister. Keep tone, pacing, narrative voice identical to competitor. Modify details, names, phrasing for copyright safety. Maintain historical accuracy. Length to 1,100 words. Optimized for TTS narration. Rewritten script. Part 2 bis 1,100 words. If the Chinese court reduced intimacy to bureaucracy, the Ottoman system transformed it into a ruthless pyramid of power. Here, a woman's survival, her wealth, her very breath, was dictated by her proximity to the Sultan's bed. Imagine stepping through the gates of Topkapi's harem during its height. At first glance, you see opulence beyond imagination, mosaic walls shimmering in candlelight, carpets so thick your footsteps vanish, and corridors echoing with the faint music of lutes and flutes. But beneath the beauty was a hierarchy, sharpened like a blade. Every rank, every chamber, every privilege was tied to one thing: the Sultan's desire. The system was brutal in its simplicity. A concubine who shared even a single night with the ruler was elevated immediately. She was rewarded with her own quarters, attendants, and gifts. She had guards, servants, and sometimes even her own small staff of scribes. Her meals were finer, her robes richer, her jewels brighter. But most importantly, her survival became tethered to her ability to hold the Sultan's favor. The deeper one's intimacy with the ruler, the closer her quarters moved to his chambers. Distance meant danger. A chamber near the heart of the palace was a throne of security. A room on the fringes was a cell of despair. Women relegated to the far corners of the compound lived as if already forgotten, eating poorer food, sleeping under thinner blankets, their days numbered. Every night was another turn of the wheel. To prevent jealousy, the Sultan rotated his visits, guided by carefully kept ledgers. Eunuchs carried tablets marked with names, and the ruler would flip one to indicate his choice for the evening. That woman would be bathed, perfumed, and then stripped bare before being swaddled in a heavy cloth. Naked, wrapped like cargo, she was carried by eunuchs into the imperial bedchamber. This ritual was not about trust, it was about control. The women were undressed to ensure they carried no hidden blades or poison that could harm the Sultan. What should have been the most private act between two human beings was instead reduced to a security protocol, an intimate encounter treated like a threat assessment. And yet, within this cold machinery of ritual, the stakes were staggering. A single night could decide whether a concubine lived in silken comfort or vanished into the shadows. If she bore a child, especially a son, her influence multiplied instantly. A barren womb, on the other hand, could be her undoing. The chief treasurer of the harem kept records more meticulous than any accountant, documenting not only pregnancies, but also dates of conception, signs of fertility, and outcomes of each union. These entries were not expressions of love, they were contracts of dynastic survival. The future of the empire, its heirs and legitimacy, were scribbled into ledgers as though they were transactions in a marketplace. But hierarchy did not stop at pregnancy or position. The very architecture of the harem reflected its twisted order. Under Sultan Murad's reign, it is said that 40 women at a time lived within Topkapi's walls, each with her own chamber, yet all arranged in calculated layers of access. Those closest to the Sultan's private quarters lived in opulence, those further away languished in quiet neglect. The building itself became a map of power, where every door, every staircase, whispered a woman's rank in the game of survival. Naturally, such a system bred competition, and where competition determines survival, kindness becomes a liability. Behind the silken veils was a battlefield without swords, a war fought with whispers, powders, and daggers hidden in the folds of robes. A cup of sherbet could be poisoned, A smile across the dining table could mask the planning of your death. A compliment whispered in your ear might be nothing more than bait to lower your guard. Rivalries erupted with ferocity. One woman clawed at her competitor's face in a frenzy of jealousy, disfiguring her permanently so she would never again tempt the Sultan's eyes. Another arranged for her rival to be shoved from a balcony, the fall disguised as a tragic accident. Some disappeared, entirely vanished into the bowels of the palace, their names scrubbed from records, their bodies never found. Every victory came at a cost. Every defeat was final. Even the Sultan himself was not free from the paranoia this system created. Surrounded by women who alternately loved him, feared him, and plotted against him, he trusted no one fully. Hence the elaborate protocols, the inspections, the constant presence of eunuchs. Even intimacy was transformed into a political act. And yet, the competition did not only consume the women, it influenced the very empire itself. When a favored concubine gained power, her family's fortunes rose. When she fell, entire households crumbled. A single poisoned sherbet in the harem could ripple outward, altering trade agreements, shifting court alliances, even redirecting military campaigns. The harem was never merely a private sanctuary. It was the empire's hidden throne room. Now, consider the psychological toll on the women themselves. From the moment of their selection, they had been stripped of identity, reduced to tokens of desire. Their lives revolved around a single question: would the Sultan notice them again? Every gesture, every glance, every word was a calculation in the endless struggle to remain visible, to remain relevant, to remain alive. This constant state of fear and rivalry created an environment of desperation that turned love into a weapon and beauty into a curse. And the cruelest irony of all, many of these women were still teenagers, plucked from their homes, forced into this gilded cage before they even fully understood the cost of survival. But perhaps the most disturbing truth of all is that within this system, women themselves became complicit. Some forged alliances, whispering promises of support while secretly sharpening daggers for betrayal. Others trafficked influence, trading secrets for favors, selling information as if it were coin. A few even sold their own nights with the Sultan, exchanging turns in his bed like stock market commodities, transactions that, if discovered, carried punishments more horrifying than death. And those punishments were merciless. Strangulation by silk cords, drowning in weighted sacks, or public execution within the palace walls served as constant reminders that failure was not just personal, it was fatal. This was the Ottoman harem, not a paradise of pleasure, but a crucible of terror. A world where women fought unseen wars beneath jeweled ceilings, and where a man's fleeting desire could topple lives, dynasties, and nations. Yet, as chilling as this system was, it was not the most grotesque example history has to offer. For in another court, far across the east, an emperor devised a method of choosing his nightly companion so absurd, so degrading, that it defies reason itself. And his solution would leave the fate of thousands of women in the hooves of barnyard animals. If the Ottoman system transformed intimacy into hierarchy, another empire in the east took degradation to an even stranger extreme. The ruler in question was known for his obsession with the harem, an emperor whose appetite knew no boundaries and whose whims bent the fate of an entire nation. His name was Emperor Wu of Jin, a man so consumed by desire that he reshaped the lives of tens of thousands of women to satisfy it. Wu's harem was staggering in scale. By the later years of his reign, he had collected more than 10,000 women within his palace walls. They were daughters of nobles, servants captured from war, and even young girls pulled from their homes without warning. Marriage across the empire was delayed or denied entirely, because the emperor reserved the right to claim any woman he wanted. For years, no man could wed without first ensuring Wu had passed over the potential bride. Entire families were held hostage to his obsession, forced to wait in uncertainty as their daughters were paraded before him like livestock. The result was catastrophic. The natural rhythms of family life, courtship, and marriage ground to a halt. Wu's greed suspended the empire's very ability to reproduce freely, as though one man's desire outweighed the future of millions. But the scale of his harem presented Wu with a peculiar problem. With 10,000 concubines waiting behind jeweled doors, how could he possibly decide who would join him each night? A lesser man might have delegated the choice to ministers or trusted confidants. Wu, however, devised a method so bizarre it sounds like parody, yet the records confirm it as real. Each evening, the emperor would climb into a small cart. The cart was not pulled by horses, nor by men, but by goats. Yes, goats. He let them wander freely through the maze of his vast harem, their hooves clattering against marble floors. Wherever the goats chose to stop, whichever woman's chamber they happened to reach, that was the woman Wu would sleep with that night. It was chance masquerading as fate, human desire reduced to animal instinct. Imagine being one of those women. For years you might wait, your chamber adorned, your body prepared, your spirit breaking from the endless uncertainty. Then one night you hear the faint bleating of goats outside your door. Your heart seizes. The eunuchs arrive, wrap you in cloth, and carry you to the emperor's chamber. But if the animals never came to your door, if the goats always wandered elsewhere, then you might live and die in that chamber without ever being seen. Thousands of women became little more than living decorations, bodies without purpose, stored away like possessions in a warehouse of flesh. The psychological effect of this practice was profound. Women were not chosen for beauty, for wit, for charm, or even for the emperor's affection. They were chosen by goats. Their value lay not in who they were, but in where an animal happened to wander on any given night. The emperor had abdicated the most intimate of human choices to livestock, and that, perhaps, was the darkest truth of all. For the women inside those walls, even their suffering was stripped of meaning. Wu's goat cart ritual reveals something chilling about imperial power. This was not just about indulgence, it was about demonstrating dominance so absolute that he could abandon human reason altogether. By making animals the arbiters of desire, Wu reduced his concubines to a status beneath even livestock. To the empire outside, this absurdity came at a heavy cost. The emperor's obsession with his harem drained resources, destabilized politics, and paralyzed families across the land. Ministers who might have spoken against it dared not risk their lives. And while the emperor rolled about on goat carts, the foundations of his realm slowly eroded beneath him. Yet within the harem, the women bore the worst of the torment. 10,000 lives condemned to a lottery of humiliation, their futures determined not by destiny or choice, but by the grazing path of goats. Some scholars describe this system as the ultimate symbol of imperial madness, a man so consumed by power and lust that he turned the private lives of thousands into a circus governed by animals. But cruelty in these chambers did not always come from the ruler alone. The competitive nature of such harems ensured that women themselves became combatants in an endless war of survival. With so many rivals and so few chances at recognition, jealousy festered like poison. Every friendship was fragile. Every gesture was suspect. A word of gossip could ruin reputations. A vial of powder could end a life. It was a battlefield where silk replaced armor and hairpins served as daggers. History remembers concubines who mutilated their rivals in jealous fury, slashing at faces to strip away beauty, the one weapon they all relied upon. Others pushed competitors from balconies, or arranged accidents that left their enemies lifeless in gardens and courtyards. Women who rose too high often vanished without explanation, their names erased from records, their chambers given to another. One night of favor could elevate you to wealth and comfort. One whisper of suspicion could see you strangled with silk and dumped into the Bosphorus or left to rot behind the walls of a forgotten chamber. And the stakes were never limited to the women themselves. Each concubine who bore a son became a potential queen mother, with the chance to influence imperial succession. Rivalries inside the harem could ripple outward, sparking civil wars, assassinations, and dynastic collapses. The emperor's bed was not merely a place of indulgence, it was the heart of the empire's politics. This atmosphere of terror bred acts of rebellion as well. In the Chinese court, one emperor narrowly survived an attempt on his life when 16 of his own concubines tried to strangle him with a silk scarf. They had endured years of servitude and torment, and when they realized no escape existed, they turned the instruments of their captivity into weapons of defiance. The attempt failed, but the punishment was a horror too great to imagine. Torn apart limb by limb, their screams echoing as a warning to every woman who remained. Such was the climate inside these jeweled prisons. Hope was scarce, despair was abundant, and the line between victim and conspirator blurred with every passing day. These stories might sound like lurid curiosities, but they were more than that. They reveal the mechanisms of power at its most intimate and perverse. The emperor's harem was not simply a collection of lovers. It was a political engine, a system of control, a crucible of fear. It turned women into pawns, intimacy into currency, and even animals into arbiters of fate. And yet, as grotesque as the goat cart system seems, it was not the final chapter. Across empires, from China to the Ottomans, from palaces drenched in silk to corridors lined with mosaics, the story was the same. Beauty became a curse, sexuality a battlefield, and survival an endless war with no escape. The goat cart absurdities of Emperor Wu might seem like the height of cruelty and madness. But in truth, the darkest chapters of harem history were not found in bizarre rituals of chance. They lay in the blood-soaked rivalries that turned palaces into battlefields and concubines into assassins. Because in these gilded prisons, survival meant war. Every concubine lived in a constant state of fear. One night with the ruler could elevate her to power. One misstep could sign her death warrant. And with thousands of women competing for the same fragile favor, alliances formed and shattered as quickly as they were made. The harem was never silent. Behind the laughter and music lingered whispers of plots. Behind every banquet was the risk of poison. Behind every smile hid the shadow of betrayal. History tells of concubines who mutilated one another in blind rage. A beauty known for her influence was attacked by rivals who slashed her face so she would never again capture the emperor's gaze. Another was lured to a balcony, shoved to her death, her body discovered at dawn, broken on the stones below. Some acts were even more sinister. A favored consort might mysteriously vanish, her name struck from the palace rolls, her chambers reassigned before her body was ever found. The official records called it retirement. The women inside knew better. Even the most powerful were not untouchable. Harem, once celebrated for her sharp wit and iron will, fell victim to strangulation in her own chamber after her rivals decided her influence had grown too great. Another, celebrated for her beauty, vanished without a trace. Rumor whispered she had been drowned in the Bosphorus under cover of night. This was the nature of the harem. It was not a sanctuary, it was a chessboard where every woman was both a piece and a player, fighting a game where losing meant death. The violence was not confined to individuals. Sometimes it erupted into open rebellion. In the Chinese court, one infamous night stands out. 16 concubines, driven beyond endurance, conspired to kill the emperor himself. For years they had endured humiliation and despair, living like prisoners, their youth consumed in service to a man who saw them as property. Desperation forged their alliance. Their plan was simple, born of desperation, to strangle him with a silken scarf while he slept, stabbing with hairpins when he resisted. The attack nearly succeeded. In the struggle, the emperor lost an eye before guards, and his empress intervened. For a moment, the women had almost overturned the very system that enslaved them. But failure was unforgivable. The punishment defies imagination. Each woman was tortured publicly, her limbs pulled apart while she still breathed. Their screams echoed through the palace halls as a warning to others. Their severed heads were displayed on poles throughout the harem, grisly monuments to the consequences of rebellion. It was not simply an execution, it was theatre. A message etched in agony: resist, and you will be destroyed. The bureaucracy of these harems ensured that even horror was carefully documented. Ledgers recorded not just births and deaths, but punishments and betrayals. We know, for example, of a consort who sold her turn with the emperor to another woman. This act, treating intimacy like a commodity, was discovered and entered into the records. The punishment? Execution. Her death was not simply personal, it was a legal precedent, noted in ink and preserved in archives. Think about that. A woman sold her most intimate act for survival, and the empire responded with strangulation, only to write the transaction down as if it were a tax receipt. Within the Ottoman harem, paranoia reached such heights that every detail of intimacy was monitored. Concubines were bathed, stripped, inspected, and swaddled before being carried to the sultan's bed. Afterward, records were kept of the encounter, the timing, even the possibility of conception. Pregnancy became a political event, monitored like a military campaign. Children of the harem determined dynasties. A single boy's birth could tilt the balance of power across an empire. This gave concubines every reason to secure the ruler's attention, and every rival a reason to destroy her before she succeeded. Poisoning a rival's food, slipping powder into her drink, or arranging accidents became strategies of political warfare. The palace corridors glittered with jewels, but the air was thick with fear. Every meal might be your last. Every gesture might signal betrayal, and the cruelty spread outward into the politics of empire itself. A favored consort's family might rise overnight, showered with titles and estates. Her sudden fall could plunge entire households into ruin. The ruler's bed became a throne of influence that reshaped nations. Perhaps most disturbing of all were the cultural justifications used to disguise this system. In China, officials argued that organizing the emperor's intimate life ensured cosmic balance, that the ruler's satisfaction maintained harmony between heaven and earth. Without it, they claimed, the crops might fail, the rivers might flood, and the empire itself might collapse. In the Ottoman world, religious scholars insisted that the harem preserved morality. By keeping the sultan's desires confined within palace walls, they argued, adultery and immorality in society were prevented. These were elaborate lies, grand excuses woven to mask the truth that harems were nothing more than vast engines of exploitation, built to satisfy the whims of men who wielded absolute power. The beauty of the palaces, the shimmer of silk and gold, the endless ceremonies and rituals, these were disguises. They covered the reality that harems were prisons, systems of control designed to strip women of their humanity, to reduce them to roles of concubines, rivals, or corpses. For centuries, the greatest empires on earth devoted unimaginable wealth and energy into maintaining these prisons. And while dynasties rose and fell, the scars remained etched into the lives of the women who survived them. They were not myths, they were not exaggerations. These were real systems, recorded in meticulous detail, remembered in whispered stories, and preserved in chronicles that still horrify us today. The survivors carried invisible wounds. They learned to smile when they wanted to scream, to flatter when they longed to fight, to trade intimacy like currency in order to see another sunrise. Many lived long enough to watch new generations of girls dragged into the same cages, knowing nothing they did could save them from the cycle. For them, death was often the only escape. And yet, even in the midst of despair, some resisted. Some plotted rebellions, whispered secrets, and risked everything to grasp even a fragment of freedom. Their courage remains hidden beneath the cruelty, a reminder that even in the darkest systems, the human will to resist never dies. Step back for a moment and consider the scale. These harems were not isolated curiosities. They were institutions of state power, binding sexuality to politics, intimacy to empire, and cruelty to control. They shaped the way entire civilizations viewed women, marriage, and authority. The palaces may have fallen, the empires may have crumbled, but the shadow of these systems lingers still in the ways power, gender, and control intersect in our world today. The jeweled walls are gone now, the silk curtains are dust. The palaces that once echoed with whispers, plots, and screams are ruins or museums. Yet the legacy of the harems remains, not in stone or silk, but in the scars they left on human history. For centuries, empires invested enormous resources into perfecting these systems of control. They polished cruelty into ritual, disguised exploitation as duty, and turned intimacy into statecraft. What should have been the most personal human connection became a mechanism for empire wrapped in the language of tradition and necessity. At their core, these harems were not places of romance or luxury. They were prisons built on beauty, institutions designed to erase individuality and replace it with obedience. To reduce women to property, counted and catalogued like treasures in a vault, the women who survived them carried scars that no crown of jewels could hide. Imagine living decades inside a palace where every friendship might be betrayal, every drink might be poisoned, and every smile might be the last one you ever gave. Imagine raising a child in such an environment, knowing his survival depended not on his worth but on whether his mother could outmaneuver rivals. For many, love became impossible, trust became dangerous. Even when freed, their understanding of human connection was shaped forever by years spent in a world where intimacy meant war and beauty was a weapon. Some left behind diaries or oral stories that reveal the depth of their torment. Others remained silent, their suffering recorded only in the margins of court documents, their humanity erased by the same bureaucracy that once scheduled their lives. The cruelty did not stay confined within palace walls, it bled into the wider society. When emperors owned thousands of women, Treating them as objects to be traded, discarded, or destroyed, it sent a message that echoed through every level of society, that women were property, their worth measured only by how useful they were to men. Cultural and religious justifications reinforced this view. In China, officials claimed the emperor's intimacy maintained cosmic harmony. In the Ottoman world, scholars argued harems prevented immorality. These justifications gave cruelty the mask of virtue, teaching generations that exploitation was not only acceptable but necessary, and that normalization left traces. Across centuries, societies learned to excuse control of women's bodies as natural, to treat marriage and intimacy as transactions, and to view female suffering as an inevitable cost of order. Even the records themselves testify to this mindset. Ledgers detailing pregnancies, encounters, and punishments survive to this day. They are astonishing not because they describe intimacy, but because of the cold way they reduce it to statistics. A woman becomes a line of ink, her life, her death, her rebellion, all captured in the same detached script as a grain tax or military order. These documents remind us that the harems were not accidents. They were designed, managed, perfected by bureaucrats who believed the empire's survival depended on reducing women to numbers in a ledger. It is easy to look back and dismiss these practices as the madness of ancient rulers, the eccentric cruelty of long-dead dynasties. But the truth is more unsettling. The same logic that built these harems, the belief that power justifies exploitation, that pleasure outweighs dignity, that control matters more than compassion, still lingers in different forms today. Modern systems may not involve palaces or goat-drawn carts, but they still exist in the exploitation of vulnerable people, in the trafficking of women, in the commodification of intimacy for profit. The architecture has changed, the mindset has not. That is why these stories matter. They are not just lurid tales of forgotten empires, they are warnings. The imperial harems of China, the Ottoman palaces, and countless other courts across history reveal what happens when unchecked power collides with human desire. They show us how easily entire civilizations can convince themselves that cruelty is necessity, that exploitation is order, and that the suffering of thousands is a small price for the comfort of a few. The women trapped in these systems did not choose their fate. They were chosen, selected, inspected, broken, and consumed by machines of power that saw them not as human but as resources. Their survival required navigating rules so twisted that death often seemed like mercy. And yet, even here, in the darkest chambers of history, there were sparks of defiance. The concubines who tried to strangle their emperor, the women who plotted, schemed, and fought, not because they believed they could win, but because they refused to surrender entirely. Their resistance may have failed, but their courage endures as proof that even in systems designed to erase humanity, the human spirit resists. As you step away from these stories, remember, the jeweled walls and silken curtains were illusions. Behind them stood a truth that echoes across time. These harems were not palaces of paradise. They were prisons where beauty became a curse, where desire became a weapon, and where survival came at the cost of dignity. The empires may have fallen, but the patterns they left behind remain woven into the fabric of our world. So when you hear these tales, do not dismiss them as curiosities. Hear them as warnings, because history's darkest experiments in power are never as far behind us as we'd like to believe.